Hello, this is Heather Hoffman, and today I'm excited to be introducing to you the newest STAMPtember collaboration for Simon Says Stamp. This is from Dare to be Artsy. It's called Merry Mix and Match. I'm going to be creating a couple of shaker cards, one of them live in the video, and then the same technique, I created one in advance that I'll show at the end of the video. Let's take a look at this set first. You've got those 3 fun circle elements. Then you have options to either create a snow globe or ornament, depending on which version you want. One goes at the bottom and one at the top. You've got 3 cute little snowflakes, a fun sentiment that is just made for shaker cards, and then a cute little mug of joy and those extra little 3-dot snowman. Or snowflakes. Lots of fun options. And of course, there's coordinating dies. The coordinating dies work for every single element in the stamp set. You've got that circle that works for all 3 of those images, and then all of the little extra images as well as the sentiment, and even each of those tiny snowflakes has its own coordinating die. Since we're making a shaker card, we're going to heat emboss on some acetate. I'm using Simon Says Stamp, the heat resistant version. That's important since we're going to be heat embossing. And I'm going to use that cute little truck, the wintry truck tree scene. I feel like that's such an iconic wintry image. And I've got my acetate lined up in my MISTI. Now, one of the most important things to remember when you're heat embossing on acetate, the powder tool is your friend. Lots and lots and lots of powder. I went over and over and over this, kind of dabbed it on to put a really heavy coat of powder compared to what I would normally just put on cardstock. The acetate has some natural static electricity that wants to attract the embossing powder and hold on to it a lot more than just normal cardstock. So once I had that powdered up really well, I'm going to use my clear embossing ink to ink up the image. The great news is you don't have to stamp multiple times. The acetate picks up that ink really well. I'm pushing really gently with fingertips. I don't want to smush out the details of that image, again, because it's going on such a smooth surface. You can kind of see that powder reflecting on the surface too, and maybe even that image. I know it's really hard to see on the acetate on camera, but we've got that stamped on there. I'm going to use white embossing powder. I wanted something that would really pop from the background that we're going to create. So white seemed like a good choice. Gold embossing powder would also work well, or your favorite color. And I'm carefully trying to keep it as much as I can just on that stamped image. You can see how that embossing powder wants to cling to that edge really well. So normally I would do this over the garbage. I just had to clean my desk, so I paused later and did it. But I tend to turn it over and give it a good flick from the backside. The stamped image holds on to that embossing powder really well, but it helps kind of kick it off some of the spots you don't want it. And then you'll notice some of that embossing powder, just that static cling, some of it was sticking to the front, some to the back. That side part's really not going to show anyway, but I just used my microfiber cloth to get some of that excess off. You can also use a paintbrush, however you prefer to do it, but I just wanted to get a little bit of that extra taken off. Now I'm pulling out my heat gun, and one thing with acetate that I like to pay attention to is I try and only emboss it with the heat until it just melts the powder. This acetate's pretty sturdy and stable, but I don't want to overheat and warp it too much. So I'm just carefully going over. You can see that that image is nice and crisp. And I'm going to set it aside and let it dry really thoroughly. While that dries, I went ahead and created my window that we're going to use for the shaker. So I pulled out those coordinating dies, and I'm kind of just setting that circle sort of top center. As it turned out, I could have moved it a little lower, but look at how perfectly that lines up to create the little window for our cute little scene there. Now, I could have done an ink blended or watercolor background, but I really love these color blend cardstock panels. This is the holiday version, and I've already pulled out a color that I want to use, which is that lovely deep forest green. And you can see how that white image just pops on the background. For this one, I'm going to create an ornament. The other card I used the snow globe part on the bottom, but we're going to heat emboss on another interesting material. This is Tonic Honey Gold matte or satin metallic cardstock. And same thing, I'm going to use a decent amount of the powder tool on there. I'm going to stamp it. I'm going to add my white embossing powder just like I did on the acetate, and be nice and careful not to overheat once I've got my powder on there. I loved the addition of the gold cardstock for this element. I also did the same on the other card that I did the snow globe portion. And again, you could use any colored cardstock. You could do it on white cardstock and ink blend over the top to get your own custom color, but again, it just kind of added a little touch of glam and glamour by using that metallic cardstock. And I carefully just heat embossed just enough to melt the powder. All right, the final thing that we need to stamp for this card is our sentiment and all of those 3 little snowflakes. I'm going to add those as embellishments at the end. So I'm stamping them in VersaFine Clair ink, which is a nice crisp black ink. This time I'm just stamping. A lot of times I love to stamp it and then heat emboss it with clear embossing powder. This ink, because it's a pigment ink, it works really well for heat embossing like that as well. All right, for a little bit of interest on our front panel, I'm pulling out the A2 Scalloped Rectangles dies. And now that I'm kind of seeing my card design come together, I ended up wanting to center that circle a little more. So that gave me room to kind of cut it where I wanted to fit everything on. And now that I've got that panel cut down, my piece of acetate was definitely a little too large. So I'm just trimming a little bit off to make sure it's not going to hang off the sides of my scalloped edge. I really only need it big enough to tape in place behind that circle. So don't cut it too small, but you have a little bit of wiggle room there, and I didn't want extra. To hold the acetate in place, I pulled out some good sturdy adhesive. This is score tape, just 1/4 inch, and it has a nice strong hold, which is perfect for making sure your card holds together well. Shaker elements have a lot of pieces, and I always like to make sure everything is really solid and sturdy so I know it's not going to go anywhere. All right, peeling off the backing on that, and then I'm going to use the front of that to adhere so I can make sure I perfectly center it before I adhere it down. Taking my time and getting it on there just right. And there you now have that perfectly lined up shaker element. How cute is that? Like I said, you could put that on any colored or ink blended background and it's just going to be super cute, even without turning it into a shaker element. I think it's a really effective look. All right, now it's time to build our shaker. So I'm going to use some foam adhesive here. This is, I think it's 3/4 wide foam adhesive. It's a little bit wide for the sides. So you notice I'm just taking up larger piece and then I'm going to trim it inside into 2 strips. I'm using some bigger scissors. The adhesive can be a little sticky, so I'm just kind of cutting carefully to make sure I have that in the right size strips. You could also use pre-trimmed foam adhesive strips, and that would work great for this as well. One of the most important things, especially since I'm filling this with glitter, I'm making sure to get a really tight seal. I don't want any teensy tiny gaps that are going to allow any of that glitter to spill out. So I made these strips a little longer than I needed, and I'm pulling my scissors in just to cut it right along there so it makes a really tight seal. There's no gaps whatsoever. If you do end up with a gap, you can just fit a little more foam adhesive or something in there to keep it from causing you problems. All right, now I have some Fusion glass glitter. I picked glass because it's a little bit heavier and I think it'll slide around in my shaker element a little more, but feel free to use whatever your favorite glitter is. I know the new Tim Holtz chunky glitter, when I filmed this video, I didn't have that in hand yet, but I think that would be a perfect fit for this as well. Or your favorite shaker filling. Any of them are going to be super cute, but the glitter really gave a good snowy, frosty effect. All right, and then right before I dumped it in there, I used my powder tool again. That's kind of a trick I've learned to go around the edges, and it kind of just fixes any little bits of adhesive that you don't want the glitter to get all stuck and caught on around the edges of your card. And then I'm really being careful as I pull off the backing of that foam tape. I don't want to tweak it and get glitter all over my adhesive. And then I'm adding a tiny thin line of liquid glue as well. The foam tape's going to do a pretty good job, but I feel like that's just one more little bit that's going to help make sure everything holds in place well. And then to make this easier, I trimmed another piece of that acetate to put on the back. Part of that's going to make it easier to center the finished element, and it also lets that glitter move a little better. So I weighed that down just while the liquid glue dried slightly, and I set it off to the side. I probably would have left it longer, but I wanted to finish the video. So I went ahead and I've added some more adhesive strips kind of on the place on that backing, just around the edges to hold it in place, since that foam adhesive isn't exposed anymore with that acetate over it. And then I'm going to adhere it on that color blend cardstock, being careful to center it. And once I have it centered in there, so the first one I made, I actually adhered it on, and you know, when you stick it down and it's just a little bit crooked and drives you nuts. Look at how cute that is. So I always save this step until afterwards. I wanted to trim that panel down just slightly to give a little bit of a border when I adhered it on my white card base. But again, I always wait till I've gotten this far, because on the last card, it kind of saved me because I was able to straighten off that edge just by lining it up with my paper trimmer to get a straight line all the way around. So it's kind of a good way just to kind of fix those little mistakes on there. And I just trimmed a little bit off on all 4 edges to make sure it's even. And now I'll be able to adhere it down and have a nice little border on the edges. All right, I pulled out my big Momma foam adhesive. I love this adhesive because it's a little bit thinner. I needed the thick adhesive to form my shaker element. But while I still wanted some dimension on these front pieces, I didn't want to have it too thick. So this provides just that perfect tiny bit of dimension without it being overwhelming or getting too big. So I'm going to add that ornament topper and then my sentiment down below, all with that. And then I pulled out some thin foam squares from Simon Says Stamp as well. And I'm going to use those in a second to adhere each of those little tiny snowflakes down. So I kind of planned out my arrangement, figured out where I wanted them, and I'm just kind of sprinkling them around for fun. And then I just added, they're the perfect size. That littlest one, it was a tight fit, but I was still able to get it in there and get that adhered down. I love that the snowflakes come in a trio. It's the perfect size and quantity to have a little something to embellish. And there's something so pleasing about an embellishment on your card that is in threes like this. It's just pleasing to the eye. And then I'm adhering that in place on my card base. And then we need a little more sparkle. So I pulled out some of my favorite Dazzling gems in clear. And I'm only going to use the very teensiest, tiniest of these and put one in the middle of each of those snowflakes, and then 2 more in each spot. So again, I'm using that rule of 3s to get that little trio effect, and then adhering those with my Barely Arts glue since it's got that lovely super fine tip. And there you have it. That is finished. And look at how beautifully that glitter moves, how it just looks like falling snow. It's so pretty and sparkly. And then there's the other version. I used a blue background for this and did the cute little wintry cabin on this one and turned it into a snow globe instead of the ornament. So added my sentiment at the top instead. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you were inspired, and I hope you enjoyed this fun new STAMPtember collaboration. And I can't wait to see what you make. Have a great day.
Hi there, I'm Heidi, Simon's mama and founder at SimonsSaysStamp.com. Thank you so much for watching our video. If you like what you just saw, be sure to press the thumbs up and subscribe to see more great content.